Cool. Yeah, hello once again. My name is Victoria, and topic of today's lecture is styling and routing in React applications. Yeah, who don't know me? I was reading the first lecture about React basics. Again, I'm a software engineer, mostly software developer. I would say experienced mentor and lecturer. Yeah, and we'll begin from styling in React. We have quite a few styling methods in React, like inline styles, the same method we have actually in the simple JavaScript HTML applications, CSS or SCSS style sheets, CSS modules, and styled components. Each of these methods has its own pros and cons. Each of them is suitable for certain situations and projects, but it is up to you to decide which one of them is suitable for your situation and which one to choose for your application. So, the first one we would discuss is inline styles. And the main principle of this method is that we're writing styles right like an object and right in the JSX. As I said, the same method we can apply in simple HTML files, but it's not a bad practice. And in React applications, the same situation. It's not really popular in development as well. So, but it have like some cons as well, like good with small, like this good with small applications. It's easy to understand, and you have styles in JS. For some applications, it's actually a good thing, but there are more cons and pros, and there are problems with performance in this approach. We have confusing camel case for our properties in the CSS, like here background color. We used to write it with dash, but here we have to use camel case because we're still in the JS and we're writing right in the JS6, which is what is extension for JS, so we can't use kickbop case, if I'm not mistaken, with dashes. Yep, the another cons is that it is actually bad for large applications because it creates something like spaghetti code, long, hard to read, and so on. It's hard to implement style animations, to use media queries, and reference pseudo classes and elements. Okay. The next method is to use simply use separate style sheets, and here we have more common methods where we have separate file for styles written with CSS or some preprocessor. This method is more comfortable and known for you, I suppose. So there are much more pros and cons in this method, and they are like good. It's good with large application because we separate our style from the JSX and JS itself. Easy to reuse because we can like copy paste or just transfer style files to the place we need them, or and more and easier to read. And that styles are out of JS. But as you can see, this point is actually also in pros and cons, because as I said before, the method you choose to style your component in React is very depend on your application, on what you are doing, and mostly what your team likes if you're starting your application from scratch and your project from scratch. So for some commons, and for some application styles out of JS would be a bad thing. But for some, it would be good because if you heard about another JavaScript framework, Vue.js, it uses, let's say, pattern to compose its components, because in Vue.js you have styles.js and the landing of your component itself in one file. But you of course you can separate them, but the main concept is that you have everything in one file, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's a bad approach with like keeping everything in one place is okay, but for example, for me, it's not a case. I'm like separate, let's say, responsibilities. Like style should be in one place, JS should be in the second place. So it's up to person. Yeah, and the second cons of this method is that you might have scope issues. You might already face this problem just using CSS, because even with different files, we don't have like modules in CSS. Like in JS, for example, when you import file in a separate one, you are sure that all variables that you created in the imported file are in module. They are scoped in this file, and you can't use them in the another file except only if you exported them manually. Here in CSS, in plain CSS, let's say, we don't have this. Like if you just import file of CSS in JS, in HTML, you don't have module. So if you use, don't use something like BAM notation or separate method to ensure that your style classes are unique, you might face with a problem when your classes can overlap, and you would have some issues with this. And actually, to solve these problems, this problem not in the plain CSS, but with help of Webpack, we can have CSS modules. And this approach also uses separate file for styles, but it solves the scope problem. And the main concept of this method is that your styles from CSS file will be imported in your JS as an object. And classes from the CSS will be used as properties of this object, like here. This is how you will define your class names, and as you can see in the example. But the real magic of this method is that after building your HTML, all your class names will get a hash. And this will ensure that every single class name is unique. Even if, for example, you use like simple class names in every file of CSS, all of them will be unique for a rendered page. And the last but not least is styled components. This approach allows you to apply style like wrappers components. You create this component strictly for styling, and it actually has its drawbacks. For example, what I personally don't like about this method is that you kind of mash your components, your files, your components for styling with components for business logic, and you need to, I don't know, create some prefixes or postfixes or something like that to understand which component is for styling, which component is for business logic, and so on. And it has its known performance issues. You actually have to add additional library for a project, like style components is a library, And as you probably already know, that adding um, extra libraries not always a good idea, because the more libraries your project has, the more vulnerabilities and issues it can bring. Because when you install your npm libraries or packages, you can see that sometimes you can write like you have like 70 vulnerabilities from 200, for example. It means that it is possible security issues on your website, so be really cautious with this. But its style component has its pros, like GS, CSS, and let's say HTML is in one file. It's easy to reuse component because you have everything in one file. And you don't need to add additional configuration as we have to do with CSS modules. We have to configure properly our Webpack. You just install your library and you're ready to go. Yeah, do you have any questions about this chapter of our lecture? Okay, I hope not. Okay, let's proceed then. And next, what we're going to discuss is actually SPA, or single page application. And learning React, you probably already heard this word, and let's like discuss what does it actually mean. And a single page application is a website that re-renders its content in response to navigation actions like clicking a link, for example, but without making a request to the server to fetch new HTML. So it's rendered on the fly. And if you remember, in the first lecture, I showed you the page loading pipeline, where this process of going on a server for HTML and other resources was described. The point of a single page application is to avoid requesting request to avoid request hitting the server during navigation. But it's okay to create like Ajax process. Oh my gosh. Ajax requests for some data. Yep, so single page application can use state for page from internal state or external or location-based state. Internal state of SPA is limited because it's only there's only one entry for internal state, and it is root. A single entry means that you always start at the root when you enter the application. So when you navigate within an internal state application, there is no external representation. If you want to share some content, the other person loading the application will start at the root. So you have to explain how to get to desired content. So here you can see that we start at the apps entry, we navigate it to some page, but we didn't our application didn't update the location, and sharing the link with someone else of this page won't show the user the page we wanted them to see, because as you see here, we didn't change the URL, and location of our page. Yeah, but for external stage, it is like different thing. With location-based SPAs, we share a link and we confident that anyone opening this link will see the same thing as we saw, because the location is always updating as you navigate. So here we started in the route, we navigated somewhere, we copy the link from the URL from the browser and share with our friends, and he see the same page. So yeah, as I said, the purpose of the SPA is not to download the HTML from the server while you going in the site, but it's okay to load data, for example. Cool. So to understand React Router, I would like to describe you a bit about URL and how to get it, what is contained of, and so on. And you can get full URL of the page from window.location property in your JavaScript. And this object contains of protocol, hostname, path name search, and hash. Yeah, probably you already know most part of it. For example, if you implemented anchors on your pages already, you know that you use hash to create these anchors on your page. Search query you already seen, for example, in the Google, if you look for something in your URL, you have like long search query. Path hostname and protocol is the like basic things. So I hope you already know about them. And the question is how to control URL without page reloading. And well, you can change hash, for example, as I already told you, or you can use history API from window.history property. It exposes useful methods and properties that let you navigate back and forth through the user's history, but only on the current site, and to manipulate contents of the history stack. Yeah, maybe some questions so far. Maybe something isn't clear because we're going further. Okay, hope not. Let's go. Cool. Yep, routing. Routing is the ability to move between different parts of your application when user enters a URL, for example, right in the browser, or clicks an element like link or button, maybe icon, image, and so on within the application. And in this chapter, we will get introduced to routing in the React application itself. Yep, and to extend our application by adding routing capabilities, we will use the popular React Router library and I want to point out that it's not a part of React itself. It's a separate library that was written by different people than React was written by. So yeah, be careful with that. And as you know, components are the heart of React's powerful declarative programming model, and React Router is actually a collection of navigational components that compose with your application. So it's nothing more, nothing less than just some extensions to basic components of your application that give you some possibilities of routing. You This won't be a problem to create simple router with internal state, just using some state of your application, maybe some local storage, and just some if-else state. So it will do the trick. But to work properly and to allow sharing the link, for example, with staying on the same page and so on, you actually would need either use History API or just go and download React Router library. Yep. This library has three sub-libraries, let's say, React Router, Router DOM, and React Router Native. And this is the same as in React library itself. React Router is the core library. React Router DOM is a variant of the core library meant to be used only for web applications, and React Router Native is meant to use with in mobile development. Yeah, there are let's say three types of components in React Router. It's router components, navigation components, and route matching components. Router components is used to use, oh my gosh, it's created to use different approaches in routing. For example, as I said, that you can use hash for navigating on your application without reloading, or History API. So we already have like two options and two possible routers, but actually React Router gives you more. And navigation components is like links. I guess that's it. that's a link. Yeah, you use links to navigate on your application, but there is like a bit more under link components in React Router. And route matching components is the components that check that root of your application match with some hard-coded, let's say, one, and allow you to do something accordingly. And yeah, so let's talk about router components. And as I said already, we have two, like browser router that uses HTML5 history API, like push state, replace state, and the post state event to keep your UI in sync with the URL hash router. Uses the hash. Yeah. What a surprise. Yeah, it uses hash portion of the URL from window.location.hash property, as we saw in the beginning of the lecture, to keep your UI in sync. Memory router, it's a bit different one. It keeps the history of your URL in memory. It doesn't read or write to the address bar, and as you may already analyze its internal state router. So sharing the link of this application built on the memory router won't give you the page you wanted to share. And usually is used in the tests where you don't have like browser itself, or in non-browser in non-browser environments like React Native, for example. Yeah, and the last one is a static router. It never changes location. This can be useful in server-side rendering scenarios when, for example, the user isn't actually clicking around and the location never actually changed. So we don't need like routing and checking the URL, hence the name static. And it's also useful in simple tests when you just need to plug in a location and make assertions of the render output. as you can see, the difference between them is in the approach they use to manage URL of your single page application. Let's dive into this example. As you can see, we have this is example of simple root app component with router implementation. And what we're doing here is we wrap all route components in the router. Here I use browser router, but it can be any of the routers we talked just now. And social components will render accordingly when we change the URL of our page. So for posts, we render post. Here is a typo. It should be just post. About render about component, and this route render not found page. And route component is just a component like nav, and without a path like here, it always match. So don't forget to pass it actually, but this not found page is actually a different example, and we'll talk about this later. And route is URL or path matching component. It just ensure that your path that pass here match the URL from the browser and show your component accordingly. Slash in the path property of router is a start symbol of each route. If you want to create a home page route, simply pass plain slash without any route in the path property, and you'll create your home page. And also we have like exact property. When true, route will only match if the path matches the location dot path name exactly. On the example here, here, we have route about that should match exactly. So this means that, for example, for route posts, URL with some extra text in the end also will match, but for route about here, it isn't the case. This, for example, route won't match. And here you can see that both of this route posts and post dot slash ID will match actually the same URL. And this is how you can use composition of your application to do this. Sometimes we need to render only one component. Sometimes we need to render a few depending, but we'll talk about this a bit later. But yeah, React Router allows us to do this. Maybe some questions so far about the example, maybe something isn't clear. If not, please say that everything is fine. Can we use router for SPA? We can't create SPA. Let's say in React, it's hard to create SPA without router. So using router, we create SPA, kind of like this. So answering your question, yes, we can. We should actually use it. Where is post component? It's here. All the components I created for these rows are here. So post component should be here. It's like a typo, sorry. Shouldn't the first link have exact path? Depends on the case, actually. This example here might be confusing because logically it should like load the page of posts and load the page of single post. So this should have logically exact property, but sometimes, for example, we don't want this, or I don't know, it's hard to imagine the case right now, but logically, yes, you're right, we should have exact. But to show you that you can combine your components and your paths with roads to compose and to create certain landings, I didn't add exact here. If we go to post/1, we will go to post. No, not really. It's path here doesn't show where we will be. It just show like, imagine it like regex match. So this means that if your URL have /.post in your URL, show these components. That's it. If we would have exact here, if we would have something except for /.post, it won't show this component. Yeah, so let's go further. And yeah, as I told you before, we have navigational components. There are three main navigational components: link, navlink, and redirect. Yeah, and because we actually in Router we don't use window.location to change our location in the browser. We use browser history API or hash in the location, not like changing path itself directly. We can't use simple links to navigate in our application. If you use simple link, you would just go away from your application to somewhere else. So yeah, to somewhere else. To stay on in the path schema of your application, you have to use navigational components from React Router. And yeah, the main is link. Link components provide declarative, accessible navigation around your application, and as you can see here, its main property is to. It shows where we want to go on our application, and as you can see from the example, it can be a string, an object, and a function. A string should be a representation of the link location, created by combining the location path name, search, and hash properties here. So you create the string by yourself. If you use object like here, oh my gosh, sorry. If you use an object, you can have any of the following properties and mostly represent the same thing as string, but in different ways. So we also have here like path name, search hash name, hash, but additionally we can have state, and we can kind of share it from row to row, and sometimes it can be useful. Yeah, about this question, why after 2 equals there are 2 curly brackets? Because to put something in the properties of React components, we have to wrap it in curly brackets. It's the first curly bracket. The second one defines that this is an object. So yeah, I hope I answered your question. Okay. Yeah, and when to is a function, we should pass current location as an argument, like here, and return location representation as a string or as an object, like here. So we return here, it's arrow function. Um, yeah, and it can be useful to create dynamically changing links. For example, if we should change our link according to some properties, props, I mean, or state, maybe some request. Probably if you would need it for some reason. Yeah, moreover, we have a component like navigation link or nav link, and it is a special version of a link that will add styling attribute to the rendered element when it matches the current URL. To style, you can use active class name like here, or active style according to your styling strategy. For example, if you use inline styles, it would be better and more useful to use active style property to style. Here we just pass name of the class that should be applied when our nav link now is active. Yeah, and the last component, the last navigational component is redirect, and rendering a redirect will navigate to a new location. The new location will override the current location in the history track, like server-side redirects do. If you don't want to override your location window.location, you can put push and you would just add anything you need to it. So this works like simple link. Okay. Yep, and the switch components. It's I would say it's a wrapper for router matching components. Switch components render the first child route or redirect that matches the location. Yeah, I didn't mention here that redirect is actually not really a navigational component. It's same as road here, but it works with your past path in a slightly different way. So we use it in the router level, like not in router, but in router. But it's actually we put it in the level of a path matching component, but it works like navigational, let's say like that. Okay, yeah, and switch. How is it different from using switch is different from just using a bunch of route components. And switch is unique in that it renders a route exclusively. In contrast, every row that matches the location renders inclusively. If the URL is about, like let's say here, then about this component, user and no match components will all render because they all match the path, as you can see here. Here we have exact, that's why it won't be rendered, but here all of these roads will match road about. This is by design allowing us to compose roads into our application in many ways, like sidebars and breadcrumbs, some bootstrap tabs, and so on. But occasionally, not even occasionally, most of the time, we want to pick only one road to render. And if we add about, URL, we don't actually want to see our 404 error page. It is where switch will help us. It won't go through all roads. It will stop on the first that it match. This is a slightly different logic than an exact property have, as you can see, because exact it's hard to imagine that you would have two similar road components in router with a similar path with exact, but even if you would have it, it will router will render both of these components. But if you will use switch, it will stop on the first component it will find. And the second one, even if the path is the same, absolutely the same, it won't render it. Yep, maybe some questions because we went pretty fast on this lecture. Yeah, let's have like question section and then I would show you some real life application I've created to show you some styling and routing. Are there any alternative for React Router? I actually not aware of them. And React Router is actually like the most popular and I would say the best solution for SPA. Today we got home task. I don't know, maybe if Hannah listening to us, she can tell. It's in the app, it looks very scary. Don't be scared, it's not that hard. Okay. If you have some questions, you can write them. And now I wanna quickly show you some application that was implemented using Rota and some CSS modules. Today shouldn't be also the Wednesday lecture, but Wednesday lecture was yesterday. Okay, yeah. Yeah, you probably can watch it in recording. How to show you? Let's share not only the browser, but the whole screen. Yeah, cool. So, yeah, this application was implemented using React Router, if I'm not mistaken, browser Router, and yeah, browser Router, and CSS modules. So yeah, the main thing I didn't tell you to use CSS modules in React. You can simply, if you use create React app, you just write .module before your extension, and that's it. That will do the trick. But for if you are use manual configuration of your Webpack, you have to add modules through property in your SCSS or CSS loader. It's not that hard, but yeah. So here you can see that I have my styles in here, not really a lot of them, it's an app component, but I need this container class in my application. And to use this, I'm simply import my styles as an object from CSS file and add this class of container as a property of styles in my class name. And this will do the trick with everything. So I have here my container class that I used. Also, I have like style prefix and hash. These hash ensure that my class would be unique for all application. About rota, yeah, here we import our rota component. I slightly renamed it. It's not like important, but it's like common practice when you implement this. Also, I use switch and of course route component. Rotor I used as a wrapper from my switch to actually like define that this part of the application will be routed. I use switch because I need this homepage root or with ID. I pass my component here. It's not necessary. You can use it like this. If you need. Sometimes it can be useful if you want to pass some props. For example, as you can see, nothing has changed. It has hot reloading. So yeah. Yeah, cool. Yep, and this pretty much it, I would say. To show you the second page, as you can see, footer and header components didn't reload when I go through my application. Nothing actually changed. Changed only main. Like here, as you can see, that header and footer are out of the rota. Yes, that's, I guess, it. Maybe you have some more questions because that's the end of the lecture, I'm afraid. Okay, and I can see no question. Then have a nice evening, guys. Bye bye.